Welcome back, everyone. It's Aric from Rare Candy, and here today I want to take a little bit of a look ahead into the future and talk about the new Pokemon V-STAR that are set to release in the new Brilliant Star set. But more specifically, I want to talk about ways to beat them, which might seem a little bit odd since they haven't even released or really had a chance to prove that they need to be feared just yet. But I think their introduction actually once again creates the need for Pokemon that can attack for a very specific range of damage that hasn't been needed for quite some time now. So currently in the Pokemon TCG, we have Pokemon V, which usually have around 200 to 220-ish HP. But then we have Pokemon VMAX, who see a massive HP jump into the lower to mid 300s. And that leaves a pretty big HP gap in between these two types of cards. Now, previously, Tag Team Pokemon did once occupy this space prior to their rotation.
Good riddance.
But with them gone, we haven't really had any other cards that fit that role. And as a result, a whole host of cards that could hit in this damage range are now quite a bit less useful. But with Pokemon V-STAR coming out, this new mechanic could breathe life back into some of these attackers, since based on what we've seen so far, Pokemon V-STAR are looking to sit right in that same HP range of tag teams, having on average anywhere from 260 to 280 HP. So today we're going to take a look through the card pool and see what Pokemon are some of the best positioned to deal with these new V-Stars. Probably not every card we'll talk about today will become competitive, but there are definitely still a handful of cards that aren't on people's radar that I think we should at least start thinking more about going forward. And if you haven't already, be sure to smack that like button to feed the YouTube algorithm, subscribe, and let's check out some of the best ways to take down Pokemon V-STAR. So first up, we're actually going to take a look at Leafeon VMAX, which is actually a card that has seen play up until this point. Of course, Leafeon VMAX, this card has mainly seen success for the Grass Knot attack, 60 for each energy in your opponent's retreat cost. All the V-Stars we've seen so far have 2 retreat costs, so that means with a Galarmon in play, you're hitting 240, which even though it is narrowly just shy of a one-shot on some of these V-Stars. With one snipe from Inteleon, you can actually creep that damage up to 260, which will deal with some of the V-Stars that we've seen thus far. And of course, on subsequent turns, if you have additional Inteleons in play, you can creep that damage up high enough to even pick off some of those 280 HP Pokemon. But Fire Pokemon are getting some more support coming out in this same set as well, so it kind of remains to be seen if this is a card that will see an uptick in play. But nevertheless, its damage output is close enough to be able to take one-shots with the help of some damage modifiers like Inteleon. Next up, we have a card I'd be willing to bet you guys haven't probably thought much about in a long time, and that's going to be Rillaboom VMAX, going all the way back from Rebel Clash. And this is a card that actually can easily one-shot any of the V-Stars without any damage modifiers, thanks to the max beating attack. For 3 grass and a colorist is 130, and you can discard up to 3 grass energy from this Pokemon to do an extra 50 for each you discard. So of course, we can do 280 with this attack, nuking pretty much any V-Star that might get in our way. But of course, guys, the big issue with Rillaboom VMAX for the longest time is this energy cost. The Stage 2 Rillaboom really hasn't been seeing a whole lot of play. So while the damage output from Rillaboom is right where we want it to be, it does have some other sort of inherent challenges that it's going to have to overcome. But even though this card has largely been forgotten about, for good reason I might add, this is one of those ones I think we should probably at least still keep in the back of our mind from time to time as we get more and more V-Stars. And speaking of starter evolutions, we have the recent Cinderace VMAX back from Fusion Strike. Now, this is definitely one of those cards I'm adding on here just to make sure that no stone is kind of left unturned when it comes to countering V-Star Pokemon. But this thing, of course, is a single strike card, and it has this one attack for a fire and 3 colorist. It's 230, your opponent's active is burned, and during your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. So of course, if we run through the math with that, with burn, we're hitting for 250. And since this is a single strike Pokemon, I imagine there's no world that exists where 2 of your energies aren't single strike energies. And once you factor that into the mix, we can pretty much knock out any of these V-Stars that we've seen so far. Now, of course, Cinderace VMAX does have a lot of other, quite frankly, better single strike Pokemon to sort of contend with, but this guy's typing is kind of unique compared to the other single strike attackers, so I at least wanted to throw it out there, despite it probably not being at the top of anyone's list. Next up, we have Lapras VMAX for its G-Max pump attack for 3 colorless energy does 90, plus 30 more for each water energy attached to this Pokemon. So Lapras was actually a card that had a little bit of hype coming into Sword and Shield, but I really think one of the big issues Lapras has faced is that it's honestly just kind of difficult to one-shot Pokemon VMAX, which eventually have come to sort of run the format. However, I think this attack actually pretty fairly easily can deal with basic Pokemon V and also Pokemon V-STAR. I think once you start getting above that sort of 270 damage range, things get a little bit tougher. But again, if the goal is to knock out V-STARs in one shot, I think Lapras actually could have an improved matchup spread if these V-STARs do wind up catching on. But if they don't, of course, I think other attackers such as Inteleon VMAX or even more recently Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX are still going to be probably the preferred ways to go. And speaking of Ice Rider, have to give a shout out to this thing. This card has already proven itself to be very, very good over the past year, but its damage range actually does fit right in line of where we want to hit against these V-Star Pokemon. So of course it does have the Rite of the High King attack to do 10 plus 30 for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, but Max Lance for 2 water energy is going to be the more enticing attack in the context of this discussion, because we can discard up to 2 energy and the attack does 10 plus 120 for each one that we discard in this way, meaning that if we discard both, we're going to hit for a 250 base damage, and with the help of 1 Inteleon Snipe, that's enough to one-shot a few of these new Pokemon V-Star. And of course, if you do have multiple Inteleons or can snipe over the course of a few turns, we can even pick off those 280 HP Pokemon as well. Ice Rider was already a card that did really well despite it not really hitting the best numbers against Pokemon VMAX. And with V-Stars coming into the mix, one of which actually being Water Weak, I think that might only improve Ice Rider's matchup spread, if anything. Next up, we have Pikachu VMAX. I think one of the most disappointing VMAXs we've seen thus far. This was a card that was printed in a much worse context than it was in Japan. They still hadn't rotated a lot of cards we had already lost, such as Electro Power, to help Pikachu VMAX one-shot VMAXs. But in our format without Electro Power, Pikachu VMAX wound up being a very, very underwhelming card, despite being the mascot of Vivid Voltage. But with that being said, things might finally be turning around for our boy Pikachu here. It has the G-Max Volt Tackle attack. It does 120, and you may discard all energy from this Pokemon. If you do, it does 150 more, capping us out at 270. Great number to hit for, and with just 1 Vitality Band, we can actually easily push this up to 280 to take a one-shot on these Pokemon V-Star. And since Pikachu VMAX is printing, we've actually seen quite a few other cards that do help it out too, most notably cards like Flaffy or Stormy Mountains. And with this thing finally being able to attack in a decent damage range, who knows, maybe Pikachu VMAX will finally get the redemption arc that it so deserves. So next up, I want to talk about 2 different Pokemon VMAX that I think kind of fall into a similar boat here. That's going to be Bolton VMAX and Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX. And I think a lot of my commentary for these is going to be a little bit similar to what we just talked about with Lapras VMAX. But basically, they both have these pretty strong energy swarming attacks. In the case of Bolt Storm, it does 30 plus 30 for each lightning energy attached to all of your Pokemon. In the case of Shadow Rider Calyrex, it has Max Geist that does 10 plus 30 for each psychic energy attached to all of your Pokemon. And I think previously it has been a little bit difficult for these styles of cards to creep above that 300 damage cap to be able to deal with VMAXs. And specifically in the case of Shadow Rider, we have seen things like Alchemy VMAX to be paired with it to be able to more easily take those one-hit knockouts that Shadow Rider has kind of fallen a little bit short in doing by itself. But once we get Pokemon V-Star running around in the format and requiring these attacks to take 2 to 3 less energy for a one-shot, we actually might be able to see these energy swarming styles of attacks be able to see success on their own without as much of a reliance on some of these other support Pokemon, such as Alchemy VMAX in the case of the Shadow Rider Calyrex deck. Next up, we have Mew VMAX, and I guess you could also probably count Genesect and Meloetta for this conversation as well. Not that Mew VMAX has needed any help as it has been dominating the Fusion Strike format, but V-Stars look like they might even improve Mew VMAX's matchup spread even further in the future, since it's hilariously easy to hit within this damage range. Of course, with Meloetta's attack, you don't even need any damage modifiers. If you just have all of your Fusion Strike energy in play, that's going to knock out the beefiest of the V-Stars, or alternatively, if you're copying Genesect V's Technoblast, you're just 2 power tablets away from a one-shot. So yeah, Mew VMAX definitely looks like it's going to be a card that will continue to be well positioned going forward into the future. Next up, we have Gengar VMAX, which is definitely one of the cards on this list that I am most anticipated in dusting off once we get V-Stars thrown into the mix. mainly for the G-Max Swallow Up attack. For 3 Dark Energy, does 250, but during your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. So of course, while that is going to be a little shy of a one-shot on these Pokemon, Single Strike Pokemon have no issues whatsoever increasing their damage output. More than likely, 2 of your energies are going to be Single Strike energies anyways, buffing you up to 290 damage, making quick work of really any Pokemon V-Star that's going to get in your way. And this is another one of those cards that got released into Japan's format first, which is very different and still has things like tag teams that Gengar can make quick work of. But in our format, we haven't had anything in that HP range and kind of robbed Gengar of a bit of the spotlight it deserved when it came out in Fusion Strike finally. So it's great to see Gengar is finally going to be able to probably be put to some good use after V-Star's release. Next up, we have another sort of long and forgotten about VMAX at this point. That's going to be Grimmsnarl VMAX. And even though for the longest time it has been overshadowed by something like Eternatus VMAX, its one attack here, G-Max Drill, does hit for the damage that we kind of want out of this card. So G-Max Drill for 3 Dark Energy does 170, and this attack does 50 more for each Dark Energy attached to this Pokemon, in addition to this attack's cost. But you can't add more than 100 damage in this way. So that's a long way of saying, hey, we're going to do 270 damage. You can't do any more than that. But luckily, that's a really good range of damage to be hitting for. That's going to deal with 250, 60, and 70 HP Pokemon V-Star. But of course, with a Galarian Zigzagoon or a Vitality Band, we can easily bump that up to that magic 280 damage mark to knock out things like Charizard and Arceus. However, this thing does have to contend with something like Eternatus VMAX or Gengar VMAX. I definitely think those are going to be some of the stronger Dark VMAXs to deal with Pokemon V-Star, as I think they're generally a little bit easier to get powered up, but Grimmsnarl does have a different weakness here, and not being able to be easily taken out by things like Urshifu is at least something we have to consider. Up next, we have another Dark Pokemon VMAX that I'm sure you guys are no stranger to. That is going to be Eternatus VMAX here. Eternatus for the longest time was one of the most dominant Pokemon VMAX in the game. And while it has struggled in a couple recent formats, this deck is just inherently so strong, I don't think you can ever really count it out. And with Pokemon V-Star releasing, that only gives Eternatus more incentive to see play. Because even without any damage modifiers, Eternatus already could hit for that magic 270 number, and even though that is 10 damage shy of a knockout on these beefier Pokemon V-Star that we've seen so far, this is just one Galarian Zigzagoon away from taking a one-shot on these Pokemon. Who knows, maybe the time is right for Eternatus VMAX to make itself a big comeback. Next up, we have Metagross VMAX. Definitely a card that, even though is somewhat recent, is probably one of the more forgotten about ones that we've seen on this list so far. But Metagross VMAX has a very interesting second attack here. Does 100 damage, which is definitely very far away from taking any one-shots. But on the following turn, it does 150 more. So if you are able to just keep this guy tanking in the active, you can just over and over hit for 250. And suddenly, that's actually a much more reasonable amount of damage and pretty close to actually dealing with some of these Pokemon V-Stars. That's only a Galarian Berserker or an Inteleon Snipe away from creeping this damage up to that 270 range. Now, of course, you will need multiple damage modifiers or maybe something like multiple Inteleon Snipes over the course of a few turns to creep up to 280, but it is doable at least. And even though this card hasn't really seen a whole lot of success, Metal is still one of the best supported types in the game, and I think makes an argument to take a second look at Metagross VMAX. Next up, we have another single strike attacker to consider, and that is going to be Tornadus VMAX. This was a card I was actually really harsh on. I remember in my set review when this thing came out, but I do think there is a world where things might change a little for this card. It has the Max Wind Spirit attack. It does 120 plus 120 more if there's a stadium in play, then discard that stadium. So 240, that's a little bit shy of where we want to be, but as I've kind of mentioned before, single strike Pokemon are some of the easiest Pokemon to buff the damage of. You know, we have a 4 energy attack cost with this thing. There's no world where at least 2 of the energy attached to Tornadus aren't single strike energies, meaning that you're basically always hitting 280, I think minimum, with this card. And that's not counting other things like powerful colorless energy we also have in the format to further increase its damage output. Now, of course, Tornadus does have to contend with Gengar, which actually hits a little bit harder for fewer energy, but Tornadus definitely has a better weakness than Gengar does. And the attack also does provide a little bit of disruption if your opponent has a stadium card in play. Next up, we have our first Pokemon V of the video, and it's one you guys are probably well familiar with at this point. Of course, it's going to be Zacian V. This guy has been one of the strongest basic Pokemon in the game ever since it has come out. For pretty good reason, Brave Blade does a solid 230, and this guy's no stranger to having his damage output augmented to be able to hit higher numbers. So of course, we saw this with ADP, but even with ADP gone, Zacian still has a ton of damage modifiers at its disposal. Of course, it has the Rusted Sword Pokemon Tool card to creep all the way up to 260 damage, but with either one Galarian Berserker or Inteleon on top of that, we can actually hit 280. So even after all this time, it just kind of seems like Zacian always seems to have the answers to anything it can go against. Like Brave Blade already knocks out other basic Pokemon just fine. You can pair it with Zamazenta to deal with Pokemon VMAX, and the card has so many damage modifiers at its disposal that I think you should be able to easily deal with Pokemon VSTAR as well. Next up, we have yet another single strike Pokemon that made it into this video. That's going to be Tyranitar V. You know, up until this point, Tyranitar V has not been the strongest single strike Pokemon we've seen thus far, partially due to both its high attack cost and also just kind of the awkward numbers that Single Strike Crush has hit for during this time without Pokemon V-Stars. So much like the other Single Strike Pokemon we've seen in this video, this guy is going to easily be able to hit in that mid 200 sort of damage range. But of course, thanks to Single Strike Energy, we can easily creep this up to 280 damage. Now, of course, even though Tyranitar V is a basic Pokemon compared to something like Gengar VMAX, its attack cost is a bit heavier, and the downside of this attack is also pretty sketchy. Discarding the top 4 cards is not something you want to do all the time. But with that being said, Tyranitar is going to be one of the only basic 2-prizers that Single Strike decks will have access to if they do want something that can easily respond to a Pokemon V-Star without having to evolve. So even though most of this video up until this point has been multi-prize Pokemon, there's actually still a few single prize Pokemon that I think do become better positioned in maybe a more V-Star dominated format. And the first one here, of course, is going to be Charizard. And Charizard, in all honesty, really isn't a horrible stage 2. With cards like Raihan or the new Fire Stadium that's coming out in Brilliant Stars, we can easily chain these attacks back to back. It has a great ability to help it keep getting set up throughout the course of a game. And if you have all 4 Leons in your discard pile, you can hit for 300 damage, taking care of pretty much any V-Star that gets in your way. And also too, even if you haven't discarded your 4th one yet, if the 3rd one that hits your discard pile is your supporter for turn, that still allows you to hit 280 and getting the job done here. You know, in the case of Charizard and some of these other single prizers, I think most of their issues come from other challenges they face in the current format, but assuming we can overcome those or at least dodge some of the sketchier matchups like a lot of the decks that can snipe benches with things like Rapid Strike, Urshifu, Dragapult, etc., these Pokemon might be better positioned to succeed with Pokemon V-Star in the mix. So another fire Pokemon we have is going to be the amazing rare Reshiram. For a very annoying fire, lightning, and dark energy, we can use Amazing Blaze to deal 270 damage and of course taking 60 in the process. So just right out the gate, Reshiram hits for the numbers that you need to. You know, with a Vitality Band, you can creep up to 280, but largely speaking, the damage you want to do is already kind of built into this card. Of course, the challenge for all the amazing rares, even up until this point, has been the awkward attack cost. And Reshiram actually did lose a few cards this past year that helped to get powered up, but we still have some other ways of getting this powered up. Of course, we have the new Fire Stadium coming out in Brilliant Stars. We have Flaffy to accelerate lightning energy, and we can attach dark energies manually from hand. And then from there, there's other trainer-based forms of acceleration like Raihan and Turbo Patch as well. So is it finally Reshiram's time to shine? That does remain to be seen, but at the very least, this card's damage output will not be one of its issues. Next up, we have one of my favorite single prize Pokemon that we've had over the past couple years. That's going to be the Whimsicott back from Vivid Voltage. And Whimsicott has the Flying Fury attack for a Psychic Energy, where you discard a number of tool cards from your Pokemon, and it does 10 plus 40 for each one that you discard in this way. So if all of our Pokemon in play have a tool card and we discard all of them, that hits for 250. That's right below where we want to be. And with just a little bit of help, we can get over that hump to be able to hit the numbers that we need to. Most notably in the form of Garbodor VMAX. If we have just one Garbodor VMAX in play and have 2 tools attached to it, thanks to its rubbish collecting ability, now we can suddenly hit for 290, which of course is going to comfortably take care of any of the V-Star Pokemon that we're going to run into. Whimsicott definitely did lose some important cards in the rotation this past summer, but with V-Star Pokemon shifting the format around and some of the recent sets giving it a little bit of extra support, there is a world where Whimsicott could maybe be a decent single prize deck in the future with V-Stars. Next up, we have Malamar, which is a card that has really surprised me with how well it has actually done since its release. It's definitely not a tier 1 deck or anything, but it has had a surprising number of online tournament placements. Thanks to its Rapid Strike Tentacles attack for a Psychic Energy, you reveal any number of Rapid Strike cards from your hand, then the attack does 40 damage for each card you revealed in this way, and you shuffle those cards back into your deck. With no damage cap, Malamar can already technically one-shot VMAXs, so you definitely can one-shot Pokemon V-STAR as a result as well. But needing, on average, 1 to 2 fewer Rapid Strike cards in hand is definitely going to make taking those one-shots a little bit easier on your deck. And if we do transition more and more to a format that leans more heavily on V-STARs as opposed to VMAX Pokemon, that's only going to be even better for a card like Malamar here. Up next, we can't forget about one of the most iconic single prize decks over the past year or two. That, of course, is going to be the Mad Party cards, specifically Poltegeist and Bunnelby, who have the Mad Party attack for 2 colorless energy and does 20 damage for each Pokemon in your discard pile that has the Mad Party attack. While you can technically get Mad Party's damage output all the way up to 300, these cards were always just a little bit shy of taking those big one-shots against Pokemon VMAX. And even though it is still a little bit of a challenge against V-Stars, needing 1 to 2 fewer Mad Partiers to be able to pull that off is definitely something that bodes well for this archetype going forward. And with cards like Double Turbo Energy and Ultra Ball coming out in Brilliant Stars as well, Mad Party might finally yet again have the pieces it needs to be a functioning archetype after the recent summer rotation this past year crippled it previously. Next up, we have yet another single strike Pokemon that we're going to look at, and that's going to be Lycanroc, the Stage 1 back from Chilling Reign, and it has the Rogue Fangs attack for 2 fighting energy, does 80 plus 10 more for each single strike Pokemon in your discard pile. So much like other decks of the past like Vespiquen and Flareon, as the game goes on, your discard pile is only going to grow and grow full of more Pokemon and eventually allow you to take big one-shots against whatever decks you might be going against. Now, of course, on paper, Lycanroc does have the potential to one-shot even Pokemon VMAX. But the issue is to knock out VMAXs, it just requires so many Pokemon that it kind of eats into the deck space that you need to build this as a functioning deck. So lowering that damage ceiling that you need to hit is definitely great for a card like this, especially since this is another single prize deck that is going to benefit from Ultra Ball being reprinted in Brilliant Stars as well, to be able to more easily pitch away those single strike Pokemon to do damage more quickly with this guy. Next up, we have Galarian Moltres, which is a card that actually, at the time of recording, recently has been catching on and kind of taking the online tournament scene by storm a little bit. But for today's discussion, of course, Fiery Wrath is going to be the main reason this card is so interesting here. It does 20 plus 50 more for each prize card your opponent has taken. So effectively, if our opponent's taken 5 prize cards, we're hitting 270 with Galarian Moltres. 270 is, of course, a great number to hit for, but it is still 10 shy of taking one-shots on things like Arceus V-Star or Charizard V-Star. But luckily, that's an easy fix. All you have to do is smack down 1 Galarian Zigzagoon or 1 Vitality Band, and you're going to be good to go in that respect. And that was really one of my issues when Galarian Moltres came out. This is another one of those cards that released in Japan while they have still had tag teams running around. And this is a much better finisher in that sort of context. But without tag teams running around, it's been kind of a hard sell, until recently at least, for Galarian Moltres to see play. But after V-Stars, I think that definitely could change for this guy. And for the last single strike Pokemon that we're going to look at, I promise this is actually the last one, we have another single prize here, and that's going to be the Stage 2 Grimmsnarl that actually just came out back in Fusion Strike. So yet again, this was another one of those cards that was the victim of being released into 2 radically sort of different formats. Without tag teams, this second attack called Rear Attack just doesn't have as much utility. It says, if you have 2 or fewer bench Pokemon, this attack does 100 plus 140 more. That is, of course, going to deal with basic Pokemon V, but thanks to cards like Single Strike Energy, we can bump that damage output up to 280, and with V-Stars entering the game, this attack outside of Japan finally has a little bit of utility. Now, don't get it confused, guys. Grimmsnarl definitely still has some issues, but nevertheless, it's another one of these cards that we now have to at least start thinking about going forward. And with that, that's going to wrap up the last Pokemon that we're going to take a look at for today's video. Even though I think Brilliant Stars is going to probably shake up the game a good bit, a lot of cards that were previously doing well in the format, I think will probably still continue to do so. But I still think it's exciting to take a look at some of these cards that maybe have been forgotten about for a little while now. Definitely let me know your full thoughts down below in the comment section. Which of these cards are you guys looking forward to taking down Pokemon V-Star with? And are there any cards from this list that have kind of been forgotten about that you think you might revisit? Definitely excited to see what you guys in the community are thinking here. But I really do enjoy making these sort of long form discussion videos. And if you guys did enjoy this content, be sure to smack that like button and subscribe to the channel with those notifications turned on. That way you'll stay up to date with the rest of my Brilliant Stars coverage. And if you want to take your support to the next level, you can always become a patron at patreon.com/rarecandytcg or pick up some merch over at rarecandytcg.com. Links to those will be down below in the description. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.